have independent investigative powers, but in Hong Kong there is none. I will return to that in a moment.
Does any member wish to speak who haven't spoken in this round for this session? Mr. Charles Mock. Madam Deputy, within this session, I would like to talk about the Innovation and Technology Commission. Of course, we have seen certain new initiatives, and I'm sure some of them will be helpful for the IT innovation and technology sector. If I may turn to them. Well, on the one hand, in relation to certain researcher programs, their monthly subsidy will be enhanced. And of course, it is going to help. I'm not going to read out the actual sums. And then for the postdoctoral hub, again, instead of 2 years, it will be 3 years, so the duration will be prolonged. If I may also tell the government that on the one hand, they're going to help the sector involved. However, for the postdoctoral hub, in relation to the admission of talents, I think we're still facing a lot of difficulties. Just now, the Secretary for Innovation and Technology in his speech also said that we have a need to attract and retain talents, as well as enhancing the skills of our existing manpower. Of course, when it comes to training and education, that's the business of another secretary. But of course, by enhancing the subsidy and prolonging the duration, they're still inadequate in resolving the problem. For the postdoctoral hub program, we are only attracting a limited number of talents. You know that unless you're going to offer a very attractive package, Hong Kong isn't really that attractive. And there's also a major problem for our competitiveness. I don't think the bosses can dispense with a high salary thinking that they have got the support in the form of the government's subsidy. I think we can dispense with some unnecessary restrictions. Say, for example, as you said that the scheme should only apply to the cyberport companies, incubators, tenants, or their counterparts in the science park, etc. Well, in fact, in today's Hong Kong, other than working in the science park or the cyberport, there are also other enterprises at other places, like the co-working space. And just the other week, I went to Kwun Tong. Well, I would say that it can be called a mini Silicon Valley. Cheung Sha Wan, Lai Chi Kok are also places that will surprise you. There are many startups there. I don't want to waste time on repeating the reason why they have shifted to such areas, maybe high rentals, etc. Well, many startups have chosen not to go to the science park or the cyberport, but they have been doing well. And as a result of the restrictions, they are not able to benefit from the various subsidy schemes. Therefore, I have to say that the Innovation and Technology Commission must be more facilitating instead of just thinking of its own workload, because the restrictions within the current schemes mean that they don't have to go through the vetting again. As long as the status as a tenant or incubatee of the science park is established, then it will be fine. And they are rejecting non-talents and non-incubatees. I don't think it is a good way to spend our money, and it's not going to help the sector. For our budget this year, well, of course, I know that under the ITC, we have got the technology vouchers. It has become a regular program instead of being a pilot scheme. Again, the ITC is the government department responsible for handing out the technology vouchers. However, the scheme has attracted quite a lot of comments because the vetting procedures leave much to be desired. You have to get a large number of tenders, and it takes a long time to complete the vetting process. If you want to provide help to the SMEs as soon as possible to apply new technologies, please do not scare them away by blocking them with a lot of cumbersome procedures. In fact, they will be turned away when they take a look of the application form or the application procedures. They will be discouraged, thinking that they are not able to sort of do it. In the past, there were intermediaries, and as a result, there were certain problems because we were worried that there was a risk that perhaps it's a matter of tender rigging, because the applicants were supposed to get quotations from at least 3 tenderers. So I think we need to dispense with the unnecessary restrictions. We need to streamline the requirements or the procedures. A few weeks back, I had a discussion with the relevant companies. Well, I was told that in fact they need more information. They really hope that the ITC can get a boost in their manpower so that they will not just go to the science park, but go to other locations with the assistance of Chambers of Commerce, explain the various schemes to the target applicants, explain to them how they can find it easier to go through the application procedures. And in fact, when public officers carry out your briefing for the potential applicants, I would advise against reading out from the script. It will be difficult to understand what this is all about. In the past, we did hold certain briefings. We got successful applicants or service providers who had provided service to clients as a result of the technology voucher program to share their experience with our sort of audience. And even for the postdoctoral hub program, again, it was very useful to have the applicants themselves sharing their experience with us. And we have invited the speakers to help the ITC as well. I think we should continue along this direction. Now, the cap has been increased from 200,000 to 400,000. Please don't think that the sum of money has been enlarged and then more people will benefit. That is not enough. We need more promotion. And then for the estimates, both myself and my sector have found that there has been too much emphasis on R&D instead of substantive support to the sector. Just now, we talked about the technology voucher, and that's of a very small scale. I think you need to provide more support to the enterprises. You have been providing support, but then the support has gone to the larger enterprises as well as the R&D organizations. I think you should relax the restrictions so that all the startups and even charitable organizations or charitable trusts should become eligible to apply for the funding so that they can get engineers or engineering graduates, etc., can become their interns so that there will be more job opportunities. And then, of course, the government has been emphasizing STEM. Please don't think that everybody is fighting for a place under the various disciplines. In fact, for the engineering schools, they found it difficult to recruit students. And in fact, the academic results of those admitted do not reflect an enhancement. So I really hope that the government will work on this front. The government has been talking about reindustrialization and whatnot. I hope that we should have a support program on automation so that we can have automation projects for labor-intensive services. Perhaps we can put up $500 million. In fact, the government has got a lot of money. It can inject much more than $500 million. But we can start with $500 million, and we can target at the labor-intensive sectors so that they can embark on automation projects and acquire automation-related equipment. Singapore has done this for a few years already. Some manufacturing enterprises have also benefited from the scheme. In Hong Kong, we may not have a lot of factories, but still we have got a number of labor-intensive industries that can benefit from further automation. So I don't think that a few $100,000 under the technology voucher program can help, but we can borrow the idea. I think technology voucher is a good idea, and the government should be praised for being innovative. I think it works like a coupon for students. So you give money to the relevant enterprise, and then the enterprise can make the choice. But of course, the government is worried about possible abuses. But then this is a learning process, and there can always be further improvements. I think we can expand the idea, or you can pick up my suggestion that is at the next stage of the technology voucher program, we can set aside a category for automation. In particular, for automation equipment, it would require heavy investment. $500 million should also be set aside so that we can allow the enterprises to get $100,000 each to enhance the information security. Well, I have shared my idea with those working on information security. Well, in fact, some enterprises may not be spending their technology voucher on information security. Well, in fact, it has been found from a survey that some SMEs may not even know that their network has been hacked into, or even when they know it, they do nothing about it. So we are running a high risk, and it is an area that we should spend more efforts on. So perhaps we should be specific in our initiatives, that is, try to set up a fund to help SMEs to enhance their information security. Can it be separated from the technology voucher? Otherwise, if an enterprise gets $400,000, he can only spend money on the sales system, but not enough money left for information security. So I think it should be an area that should be singled out and given specific attention. So in relation to the work of the ITC, I've pointed out a few areas that should be further examined.
Mr. Aunokin, Madam Deputy, as I said that I would have a lot to say. Well, I've used my 15 minutes in the first session. Now there's the next 15 minutes. I wish I would have hours for me to go over everything because there is a listless examples that I can speak. Well, legislators is here to debate. Information should not be circulated. But there's no need for future legislative meetings if everything can be sorted by circulation only. Well, about the IPCC, the Independent Police Complaints Council, I haven't finished. Another inadequacy of the IPCC I have identified is that the police would say that we are willing to accept the recommendations, but where is the improvement mechanism every time, every year? The IPCC comes up with recommendations, say, for example, law enforcement, the police general ordinance, as well as searching. I would like to ask, have the police actively responded to the recommendations of the IPCC? In the future, they can say, if they've done so, that IPCC has made recommendations. As a result, the police would improve. They have to be held accountable. You can't hold them accountable. I think it's something to do with the image of law enforcement agencies, especially the police. Well, there are some police officers who themselves are involved in committing a crime. It seems like it's the culture of the police that they want face. They would assemble, claiming that they have done no wrong. Well, to be honest, to err is human. It doesn't really matter that you've made a mistake as long as there is a mechanism for you to improve. In 2016-17, the IPCC made recommendations that the police would improve the procedure for dealing with those who are mentally incapacitated. It's not fruitless because in the end there is this system of a protection card or caring card. However, in February 2018, that was the case that took place in Taiwan. In this case, someone who has mental problems was not properly handled by the police. We also need to think whether frontline police officers have the capacity to deal with these cases, so training is equally important. There is regular communications from the IPCC. There are also issues to be followed in the annual report. But they have fallen on deaf ears. If you have the heart, if you give them the money, and if there are already recommendations, they should be taken up and followed up. I think what's needed is to put in place a system to improve the entire situation. The original idea of the establishment of the IPCC is to supervise the disciplined issues of police officers to prevent abuse. I think if their functions are not reformed, then the IPCC cannot perform their duties. They don't have the investigative rights. They have no right to discipline. They have no right to make a ruling of the case. They cannot accept complaints directly. As I said, everything has to go through CAPO. I don't know why. Something that was set up a long time ago and has to stay. Why can't members of the public approach the IPCC? Why do they have to go to the CAPO first? Don't forget that there was a case when the couple was arguing fiercely with the IPCC in relation to the conclusion of a case. They are an independent body. They should have the power to receive cases and accept cases independently. So in terms of functions of the ICCC, it's high time there was a review. Their functions and powers are limited, we can all see, if nothing's changed. then they can only play a limited role. I expect that in the future, in next year, well, with an increase of estimate by 20% or so, the duties can be improved. Namely, first, to set up a reform plan of reform and to effectively put in place measures to address abuse of power, and also where they will have to clearly set out the cases that will be accepted and the cases that they will follow up. And they should also take up the duty to follow up on the cases. In their communications, it's just like a magazine when they tell you bits and bobs. We don't want that. We want something new. 4, to check cases randomly. There has been some cases where people are bound over and there are problems. The IPCC has communicated with the police, but what about the result? 5, they should draw reference from the UK counterparts so that the cases can be directly referred to prosecution side so that a decision can be made as to whether to initiate prosecution. That is very important. You can't just say that give them more money. That's our job done. I would like to move on to the next department. 173, Working Family and Student Financial Assistance Agency. So this agency, what does it do? Just to finance students? That's a good thing. I would like to say this. The FS, Paul Chan, last year talked about a $4,000 caring and sharing scheme. And that is handled by the agency. Look at the mess it's made. Every day when I go to the district, I've been told that they haven't received the $4,000 asking if this agency is actually defunct. I'm not going to blame frontline officers because they're already having a hard time because they told the press that they have to meet quota. You set them the amount of work, but can this be avoided? Well, $4,000, you have employed a bunch of people to input data. Let's think back of what happened when John Zhang was giving out $6,000. Was it so complicated? Did it involve that much administrative cost? People say that you might as well use the administrative cost to give to people. Why is the government such a miser? Well, some people have joined the queue last but received money first. Those who have submitted the application first still have not received their $4,000. I can give you a truckload of cases to you to follow up on. And they said that we expect that all applications will be processed before the end of the year. Do you dare to go to the district to tell the public that and expect to come out unscathed? I have to say this once again. I don't blame frontline officers because they have to meet deadline, they have to meet quota, they are having a hard time. Who I blame is Paul Chan and the government of the poor arrangement. The $4,000 is because of our public coffers being flushed. Mr. Ray Chan has been shouting and asking for this every year. They want a cash handout, but not done in such a haphazard way. You may as well dispense with the means test. There was no means test, no eligibility with the $6,000, and you swiftly received the $6,000. You didn't even have to submit an application. Now the government wants to return wealth to the people, but it's unfair. For the wealthy, you have rates waivers, you have a tax refund, very generous indeed. But for those who have not, and also those who are in the sandwich class or middle class grassroots, you have put obstacles after obstacles before they can get pittance. Whether it was the $6,000 in Hong Kong or the cash sharing schemes in Macau, they were done without any means test. The government should learn from experience and not do anything that involves cumbersome administrative work. Well, apart from the $4,000, the Working Family and Student Financial Assistance Agency is also responsible for the work incentive subsidy. Before that, it was the low-income family subsidy. When it was launched in 2017, they said that 800,000 people, that is 200,000 households, would benefit. In April to October last year, they have only received about 40,000 applications, which is a far cry from their target. The reason is that there are strict requirements on the number of hours as well as salary under the scheme. The application procedure is cumbersome and complicated. There is a three-tier scheme there is a three-tier mechanism under the scheme, whether it's a single-parent family, whether it's how many people are working, a number of hours worked. There are three tiers of subsidies. It's very complicated. The requirement for a higher subsidy is you have to work 190 hours per week. 24 days a week, you have to work about 20 hours a day. Well, the government is talking about 5-day week. And under your subsidy scheme, you encourage people to work overtime. It's absurd. How can you tell people that you want to implement standard working hours when you require those who apply under the scheme to work for 190 hours? Has it gone to your head? And under the work incentive subsidy scheme, there is a child subsidy. If the applicant has children that's under the age of 15, they get a subsidy of $1,000. That's great. But very often, applicants will spend the $1,000 on extracurricular activities, tuition fees, as well as buying learning material. I think in the end, it's packed with number of hours worked. It's not that I'm criticizing the child subsidy, but you require the applicant to work for 190 hours. Do you expect there is any time left to spend with the children? Family time is invaluable. Can the system be designed in a more humane way? Very often, children don't receive the subsidy because parents don't work enough hours. Isn't the design of the system ridiculous? You need to review the system. You need to delink the child subsidy from the required number of hours worked. The purpose is to make the applicant happy, not to make them work to their bones by fulfilling the 190 hours. For medium subsidy and low-level subsidy, well, you may as well give them the child subsidy as well. For grassroots students, they should be given more support and assistance so that they will be able to develop and flourish, so that their development will not be impeded simply because of the means of the family. In the end, whether it is the work incentive subsidy scheme, whether it is cash handout, you have made things difficult for staff of the agency as well as the grassroots. And that is simply because the government wants to have this complicated and duplicated system. I hope that in the future the government will take on board what I said by simplifying application procedures under the name of they can't put in place numerous tests under the principle of prudent fiscal management. Don't make it difficult and don't make people angry with cash handout. I'd like to talk about the 33 heads. A lot of them merit discussions. Well, I can go over the housing department. I can't go on for another few hours. I'll stop here. I'll pause here. Mr. Ray Chen.
First, I'd like to respond to what Mr. Aunok Hin said a moment ago, which is about Working Family and Student Financial Assistance Agency. If you go to page 897, you will see that there is the Caring and Sharing program with an approved estimate of $11.31 billion. In the last financial year, only $70 million were spent because the money has not been dispersed. And in the note, it is said that the CFF is a budgetary measure, and the provision has been approved under the 2018-19 appropriation bill. In other words, it is not seeking money under this budget. Now you have messed up the distribution of the $4,000, and people at the office are working flat out. They are actually becoming sick. I worry for civil servants and the part-timers. As you know, in Indonesia, people counting votes died from the task. If you do not have enough administrative expenditure, if you want to hire more people, please do come along and get the necessary funding. Some Democrats hate you for distributing $4,000, and this year you are not dispersing that kind of money, so they support you. So it is a matter of viewpoint. Now let's still to go back to RTHK that I mentioned in my last round. Now I don't need to spend too much time on it because many members have already spoken about it. However, I'd like to make a fair statement on behalf of RTHK. Last year, in the audit report, it is said that some programs of the RTHK had a low audience-ship, and there was a reduction of listeners to their radio channels. I can't blame the audit, which conducts value for money studies. That is their methodology, and this is the conclusion they are making. They said that in the first half of last year, Channel 31 had 0.1% of the average audience-ship, meaning 6,400 people. I'm afraid the number would be lower because starting from April, it is broadcasting round the clock. It used to be from 6 a.m. to about 1 a.m., but now it is going to broadcast round the clock, and if the audience-ship is averaged out on the basis of 24 hours, it would even go lower. Now with the resources, the RTHK has to operate 2 television channels. Can it really cope? Or should we go back to basics, that it should produce high-quality programs? And in the existing free terrestrial TV channels, we should ask them to broadcast those programs. It's just like City Forum, which was broadcast on TVB, now is broadcast on RTHK. Now, what is the audience rating? Well, it's difficult to say because people are watching it live on the internet and they are watching it on other news channels. If we still apply value for money studies as if it was a traditional TV station and say whether it has done a good job, it is not a comprehensive way of assessing it. The RTHK has spent resources to operate City Forum, and on Channel 31, people will be watching it, but then it might not represent the entire audience-ship because people watch it also on the web page. It is said that the hit rate dropped to only 2.8 million in June last year, a drop of over 30%. But as you know, sometimes we members also operate personal websites, but now we don't invest in it. We would make use of social media like Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, in order to relate to people. Donald Trump is active on Twitter all the time. So you should be more intelligent with the use of resources. And this does not only apply to RTHK, but other government departments. Every department has a web page, but the browser rate, I doubt it. I always browse the electrical website. I don't know about the public, but of course, the public always visit the observatory website. And I'm sure the browser rate may go down. It is not that they don't care about that organization, but maybe they are using other mobile applications and other channels. And it is said that there are 7 traditional TV channels, but then there is a lowering of audienship for 4 of them. But this is not just a problem for RTHK, it is also a problem for commercial operators. The RTHK is subject to value for money studies, so it is monitored about its audienship. But this is not done by the commercial organizations anymore because the figure is so low that you dare not tell your clients the audienship when you seek advertisements. Maybe you are telling people the number of likes you get on Instagram and Facebook. That is more realistic. So throughout Hong Kong now, whether it be commercial operators or public operators or even TV channels, the audienship is going down. Even for TVB, it is only at 27, 28 points. I was at ATV and my program recorded an 18-point audienship. But times have changed. Therefore, you cannot criticize RTHK like that. But should RTHK transform itself and should not take up 2 TV channels broadcasting round the clock, sometimes just like CCTV showing still pictures? Of course, we know RTHK needs a broadcasting house. In Taiwan, some public broadcasters can produce their own dramas and they could be broadcast on HBO channels. Why not for RTHK? If the programs are of quality, they can be broadcast on Netflix or HBO, and they can make money. But as a government department, can it do this with the resources it is given? I'm not optimistic, but Taiwan public broadcasters can do it. So it is not that if you are a public broadcaster, you cannot produce programs that can be competitive in the private market. And in fact, you can even win awards for it, so you have market value. Now I'd like to turn to Head 80, Judiciary, and also the Legal Aid Department, Head 94. These have been mentioned by other members. We think that we should have more resources and funding for the judiciary so that it can be more effective in taking forward cases. In its programs, there are 2 parts. 1, courts, tribunals, and other functions, and Program 2, support services for court operation. In 2019-20, the funding for the judiciary has been increased by 17.43% compared to last year. So we can see that the administration is willing to put resources into the judiciary so that cases can be speeded up so that there would be fairness done to every party. But it's quite strange. In 2018-19, the revised estimates were such that for courts, there was a drop of 5.8% compared to the original estimate. Why? And this year, you have increased it by 17.3%. But we have to remember that there was a reduction last year. I did not ask the judiciary about this, but I think the drop was because you did not have enough judges. You drew up the budget for hiring judges, but you could not fill the vacancies, so your estimates were not used up. So the revised estimate was a gap away from the original estimate. The gap was 5.8%. I think it's quite a big gap. This year, I like to say that I commend what you are doing. I'd like to talk about one tribunal, and that is the Obscene and Indecent Articles Tribunal. We have taken it to task before. The CED Bureau has something to explain here. I will attend to that when we talk about the CEDB. But I'd like to talk about the Obscene and Indecent Articles Ordinance. In 2015, we already scrutinized the relevant ordinance and it was passed by the Legislative Council. But then it came to nothing. And today, you have not done anything. And then last year there was the book fair, and then there was this book by the famous Japanese novel writer, which was classified the second tier, and it was an international joke. It was put under wraps. This was a novel by Haruki Murakami. And then it was said that the tribunal should become only a tribunal for handling cases instead of also allowing it to put classifications on articles. And then the appeal mechanism is also very problematic, but I won't going into the details here. On Friday, at the ITB panel, there will be a dedicated agenda item on the review of the indecent and obscene and indecent articles ordinance. But then I read the papers and I am quite disappointed because it is not going to solve the problems we have identified. Say, for example, the number of members. The judiciary said that it would be increased to 1,500 so that there would be a big pool instead of only including those who are particularly moralistic. You know, some people would really want to be these assessors because some of the people may want to watch the articles submitted for classification, and others who may be more moralistic. So if you have a bigger pool, there would be a fair representation. And then the judiciary said that they would reduce the number back to 750 instead of 1,500 because of the caseload. And it's quite strange if you look at the number of cases. In 2017, the tribunal processed 174 cases, 174. In 2018, 9,240. And then suddenly, there were 2 cases which involved a lot of issues. And so the number was boosted to 9,240. And then people would ask, why such a big difference in the number of cases? And it would be difficult for the tribunal to use its resources if the workload is so high. However, it has to have something to do with the tool, which is the ordinance. And then I like to go to 94, Legal Aid Department. This year, the funding has been increased, and the programs would be to study applications. There is a 7.3% increase, and then litigation services, an increase of 40.82%. So estimates for LAD have been increased by a wide margin. But you can look at civil cases. There is a big backlog. Every year, by the end of the year, there will be outstanding cases, and every year it would be around 17,000 outstanding cases. So you still have to work harder. Well, every amendment can be related to the FO and MLAA Bill 2019, because if it is endorsed, there will be more people who would need to face legal challenges. They could be extradited to the mainland or other places, and they might need to take out litigation. Would the LAD be prepared with enough resources to face that challenge? Mr. Dennis Kwok made the point. Hong Kong people may either be very rich, so they have money for litigation, or you are very poor, so you can apply for LAD, legal aid. But then those in the middle are left unattended. So I think the LAD should review the threshold for application, especially if the extradition law is revised. Many people who might be extradited would belong to the middle class. They would be neither here nor there. Would their legal rights be protected? Would they be assisted by legal aid? That is something very crucial. When you introduce such a controversial bill, you must complement it with adequate assistance measures. In other words, once and in case this bill is passed, these people who should not have been dragged into the situation would now be in such a situation, and then would these people be eligible for legal aid? I think you should review it.
Mr. Wu Chiwai. I would like to go to another department, and that's in relation to the Department of Health, in particular primary health care. It is good to see that the Secretary for Food and Health, Professor Sophia Chen, is present. The Democratic Party is watching the development of our healthcare service. Now we are getting $70 billion being given to the hospital authority instead of 40 billion. For us to spend an increasing amount of money on the hospitals, it is really cost-effective vis-a-vis primary health care. Well, for decades, the Society of Hong Kong has been operating in such a way that hospitals are the main place for treating our illness. And what about preventive care? It means that, I think in terms of resource allocation or work priorities, it seems that primary care hasn't been given sufficient attention. In the past, the Department of Health used to be in charge of the outpatient clinics. In the past, we had a clear sort of a division of labor. At the front line, we have the Department of Health overseeing the specialist outpatient clinics and the general outpatient clinics. So in other words, the Department of Health was at the front line in relation to primary health care. As time passed, the hospital authority had taken over the outpatient clinics. So both specialist outpatient clinics and general outpatient clinics are housed within the hospital authority's venues. So in other words, their roles have become blurred. It appears to me that the Department of Health has more become an enforcement agency for public health related policies. Well, for such a change of direction, it means that the government is checking the outpatient service which serves the public directly. In other words, a part is missing from primary health care. There is a problem here. Well, in fact, the government should be asking the Department of Health to provide primary health care. But then, gradually, this part has been taken out, and even if we still provide some primary health care, it has become secondary. Now, the government has been promoting primary health care, but when you look at the actual delivery of service, I don't think the government has been effective. Professor Chen, whenever I had a debate with you about this matter, you would say that we need to watch the development in Kwai Ching. For Kwai Ching District Council, they have asked an NGO to provide integrated healthcare service. So we have this district healthcare center. I don't know whether this is sort of the model that you've got in mind, Secretary. If that is the case, I will have to tell you that I'm gravely disappointed. Now, the Department of Health has the duty to deliver primary health care, and yet we can see that a lot of the clinical service at the front line has gradually been shifted to the hospital authority, and you would rather emphasize on enforcement. And you are now even asking NGOs to take up the frontline primary health care. I think it is being irresponsible on the part of the government. As everybody knows, proper primary health care means that we can detect the onset of illness at an early stage. And it is a very important concept within primary health care. By having early detection, it means that we can avoid having an end-stage cancer. Now, the government has already launched screening programs for breast cancer and colorectal cancer. I think such programs should be further expanded, and we need a proper government department to carry this out. Is it right to ask the hospital authority to take this up? The hospital authority has its own emphasis, and it is on hospital service. In other words, the hospital authority provides hospital beds, so they should focus on such secondary and above health care. Is it good to ask the hospital authority to take on primary health care as well? There is a big question mark. While I having this comment on the Department of Health, I'll urge the professor to note my observation. Second point is that I've been talking to frontline doctors of the Department of Health. Since the role and functions of the Department of Health are blurred, so they wonder if doctors working for the Department of Health are still carrying out the mission of a doctor, that is to save lives, or are they actually members of a law enforcement agency? If the latter is right, then I think we're wasting the medical training that medical graduates have received. Because what they learn at medical school is that they would like to help the sick and save the ill. When they work for the Department of Health, it seems that their focus has been changed, and it means a waste of the resources that go into the training of a medical student. Professor Chen, have you ever given any thought to this wastage? And then the Department of Health is well placed to take up family medicine as part of primary health care. Family medicine training should be delivered by the Department of Health, and then we will have a clear division of labor. Professor Chen, you have said that in order to promote primary health care, we need to advocate family medicine so that we have our own family doctors, and then the doctor will know about the medical history of both the patient as well as his family members, and then it will be easier for the doctor to understand the conditions of the patient. Now again, this has gone to the hospital authority, and everybody is having a very heavy workload. That means we are not able to sort of have development of our primary health care, in particular family medicine. On another occasion, Professor Chen, you said that we have got a committee studying primary health care and family medicine, but when will they deliver on their recommendations? Well, back in the 1990s, we have the so-called Rainbow Report. Later on, there was the Scott Report, and they were followed by a number of reports on primary health care, and the direction has been recognized. And even in the previous policy address, KLM recognized that primary health care should be regarded as a very important element. But this is not mirrored by the distribution of labor in the executive. And I think the Department of Health should take this up. For primary health care, we have elderly health centers. We've got such elderly health centers in all the 18 districts. Well, as to the total number of people registered, as of 2018, there were 47,710 for new members enrolled, 16,000. So from such figures, you can see that if you look at the total elderly population in Hong Kong, it's a very small number of members. Only a very small number of them are able to have the luck to become members of the elderly health centers. I'm not sure if the government has got a plan to expand the idea. Elderly health centers are delivering primary health service, say for example regular body checks, so that elderly people can find out more about their physical health. And then for the waiting time, we have seen a change. Of course, we're talking about the number of months that we have to wait for. As it stands, it is good, because in 2016 you waited for 5 months, in 2017 6.8 months, in the year 2018 it's gone up to 12.3 months. So longer and longer waiting time. Is it because of our aging population? Well, if that is the case, and in light of the longer and longer waiting time, perhaps the government should find a solution to meet the growing demand for elderly health centers. And what about women's health? What about men's health? I think shouldn't we come up with a plan to intervene, or we merely leave it in the hands of citizens and they go ahead with their own medical examination? What about having health vouchers so that each of them will get a voucher once every 5 or 7 years, and then they will have their own medical examination? And I think we can also encourage them to do so, so that they can, based on the result of the report, to seek whatever outpatient clinic service that they need. It is not going to cost you a lot of money. It may only cost you $1,000 or more. So starting from the age of 35, give such a voucher to each citizen for a checkup once every 5 years or 7 years. I think it would be a good idea. It would be good to sort of encourage them to see a doctor with the result of the medical examination, and it will facilitate better personal management of health. And of course, we have the e-health electronic record sharing system. It means that the doctor can be assisted with the results from the medical report, and it is going to be a win-win situation. Has the government ever considered having such a program? It is not going to be capital intensive. I think you put up with a small amount of money to encourage a person of a younger age to start paying attention to his health. Then we can encourage a greater degree of self-care, and then he may be paying more attention about the diet, etc. And then it can cut down on the health bill as the person ages. Another area I want to turn to is the very restricted or limited dental care. In year 2018-19, we found that only 30,000 people were seen by government dentists. If we can encourage the citizens to have better dental care or oral care, then again, when they age, they will have fewer dental problems. So perhaps the government should enlarge the role of the Department of Health in primary health care. I think it should be regarded as an executive arm. Thank you.
Mr. Ao Nok Hin, I would like to say whatever I have to say. This is my third round of speaking in this session. Well, there is actually a wish of mine. If I get a chance to speak for hours in the council, it would be wonderful. I hope that there will be a day when I can actually do it. We have the Secretary, Sylvia Chan, here. I was going to talk about some other department, but I don't know if your colleagues have spoken to you. When it comes to quarantine and health inspection along the border, it is rather worrying. Well, frontline officers told me that when it comes to border health control, companies engaged by the Department of Health offer different employment conditions to others. Of course, that there should be more staff directly employed by the Department of Health, but sometimes it is necessary to outsource the work. Staff members of Department of Health told us that there is actually implication, because if you allow people to come across the border if they have a high fever or if they have influenza, there may be trouble. I have spoken to the Center for Health Protection by forwarding the views of your colleagues. There is insufficient manpower stationed at the posts along the border, and as well as other areas. There is room for improvement. If I have the power, of course, I will give more funding to the Department of Health, but my power is fettered by the rules of procedure. Well, I spoke in the first round about CSD, Correctional Service Department. I visited inmates as well as the prisons. Some officers told me that there is leakage in their quarters, and there are many problems with the equipment and facilities therein. This year is different. There is no amendment to the CSD, but in 2018, Mr. H and I myself have submitted 3 amendments covering reduction of the Director for Correctional Services emolument, the reduction of the replacement of CCTV in Pick Oak Prison, and also a reduction of the communication device in correctional services facilities. But this year there are no amendments to amend the parts relating to the CSD. I think that the person most appropriate to comment on this is Mr. Siu Ka-chun. Mr. Siu Ka-chun should have been given the opportunity to participate. For Program 1, prison management, it has exceeded 3 billion. For that, it was like $300 million. For Program 2, it's $1.14 billion. We can see from these 2 programs that we can see that correction is actually less important than prison. There is this new gimmick. They have the initiative called Smart Prison. They always add the word smart to practically everything. Smart City is thinking that if you have innovation and technology, then he's smarter. You can call Rai Chang Smart Chang, then all of a sudden he becomes very clever. Well, in relation to the increase in estimates for prison management, because the CSD said that they would like to use information and technology to improve their facilities. The policy addresser said that there is going to be smart prison initiative because in prisons, biometrics and smart wristbands and facial recognition will be used to analyze information of inmates and to supervise inmates. I believe that in the coming few years, in relation to launching these technology programs, we will only see more and more of them. The fact is that the facilities in most prisons are rather dilapidated. When we go to visits, as I said, that some officers told me that there are leakages everywhere. The food is practically the same as food served to inmates. Facilities are poor, but on the other hand, you want to launch a smart prison, trying to get people's attention. But sometimes when it comes to facilities like gates, they should be improved. I would like to say something about what they're going to say in 2019 and 20 in relation to CCTV, especially electronic locks. When it was discussed in the panel, as I said, Pig Oak prison, that is 810, in relation to about $200 billion in relation to the installation of multifunction electronic locks. There will be installation of 380 electronic locks, about 160 sets of CCTV cameras, and about 480 intercoms, as well as various devices. All these items will be subject to approval under the Appropriation Bill 2019. I can't pick and choose. All I can say is my views about this electronic lock. I noticed that this is a collaboration of the CSD and the EMSD. This is not just a procurement from the outside, and there are no overseas experience to draw from. In the Special FC in SB 183 reply number, well, this is a very unique system. What would happen if there is a power outage? The CSD said in the first line that electronic lock system is very reliable. What do you mean? How do you deal with problems? What about power outage? If you can say that they can use keys when there is a power failure, then that's their answer in defense of the about $202 million. Well, they have not said anything about the restrictions of personal freedom. I have expressed concerns about the facilities over-restricting the rights of inmates. For AO6, 7, and 8, 9, there will be installation of about 1,600 CCTVs in 4 penitentiaries. Well, they have to install CCTV to cover certain areas as proof. But is it the case that the installation of CCTVs can cover all blind spots? I have asked. Black spots where rights have been trampled on, say for example, a strip search requiring those to squat down. Well, will they be covered by CCTV cameras? We have to really get to the bottom of it as to whether these locations will be covered, because these are very high-risk areas. The CSD said, as usual, that this is to protect the privacy of detainees. But it's not about protection of privacy or not. It is about abuse of power. They have completely got it the other way around. And the work of the CSD should be to improve the culture. If a CSD officer trying to lynch someone by avoiding CCTV camera, How do you expect inmates to lodge an appeal? There has been 81 investigations launched by the investigative panel compared to 123 cases of that. There has been a drop of the 98 cases. Only 2 of them have been substantiated, so it is just a very small number. 3 of them have been substantiated. 1 of them cannot be fully substantiated. It involves 6 CSD officers. The percentage of substantiated cases is unreasonably low. The department will not take the initiative to provide reasons for not substantiating the cases. All these reasons shows that Hong Kong prison has not met the standard announced in 1955 by the UN. The research division of the LegCo said that there is no effective checks and balances of prisons. In Canada, there is an independent body that can take the initiative to carry out investigations. For unsolved cases can be referred to a higher level. In Ireland, the cases are grouped under a degree of severity. In Ireland, there is an independent investigation department that will carry investigations by appointment or by surprise. Investigators they can check documents, but for our CSD, they asked for an increase of funding of $3.1 billion, but they have not explained to us why certain blind spots have not been covered by CCTV. If you don't want to cover certain locations, you cited privacy protection. I would like to talk about reintegration program 2. I would like to state my views for 2019 and 20 for matters that deserves attention, requiring special attention. There are various programs for reintegration, and they will, and also rehabilitative programs. I've asked the CSD a question under Prison Ordinance. Section 7, in relation to release and supervision, they said that in relation to the number of applications of the release program, for reply number CB182, they have received 59 cases. 20 of them have been approved in 2018 and 19. I also noticed that this is the lowest in 5 years. Compared to 2015-16, 93 cases with 41 cases being approved. So it's double the figure of the other year. I wonder how come the number of cases approved has been dropping. There may be many reasons. Say, for example, when inmates state their case, they have not properly written their proposals. Here we have a lot of justices of the peace. We have honorable legislators who would visit prisons in the capacity of justice of the peace. Of course, there will be prison visits. But has it ever occurred to you? It's a jargon. That is, if you go to a prison, if a prisoner raises the hand to you, then there will be repercussions, because CSD officers will think that you're trying to make a point, so there will be repercussions. Have you ever looked into it? And a lot of people still hang on to the hope that there will be an early release. It's not just about going to boards to reach out to dignitaries in the community. They also have to try to reintegrate. But over a year, you only accept 22 inmates to be reintegrated into society. It's low. I ask the CSD to increase the estimate for Program 2. And they should also put more time and work onto rehabilitation work. Pan Democrats have written a proposal to the CSD to improve the rights of inmates. Well, they may refuse to meet us. Please, at least, look through these proposals so that they can be answerable. Mr. Eddie Chu.
Thank you, President. In this session, I'd like to speak on RTHK, Head 116, and the Architectural Service Department, Head 25. I have heard Mr. Ray Chan speak on it twice, so I'll just add something to it. I remember at a panel meeting earlier on, we discussed the development of RTHK, and I remember at that time Mrs. Regina Ip was quite blunt with RTHK, as if she was saying, well, just settle for simple content programs, and it should not need so much money. And at that time, I responded to say that actually RTHK is actually the stabling block for the development of our news sector, because it provides a comparatively stable work environment, and it has the resources to produce programs of every sort as a public broadcaster. As Mr. Ray Chan was saying, given the change in media ecology, and commercial operators can wind up at any time, and they do not have resources to get the news overseas. So the mission of RTHK is actually now more important than ever. Here I'd like to say further that the administration should not always think that the RTHK is going to make it lose face, that it would negate its work, and that it would badmouth Beijing so that you keep a dog but it bites you. In this regard, RTHK enjoys editorial independence. It monitors the government, not just the Hong Kong government, but also the Beijing government. It is actually advantageous to the government, because I'm particularly aware that recently on its English channel, RTHK went to Kazakhstan to interview people who have been interned in education camps in Xinjiang, and recently Hong Kong Connection also produced a special series on the vanished 116, meaning whether MTRCL was actually suppressing industrial injury figures in its project Shatin Central Link, so that it won an award. Now, this is actually very important monitoring of the two governments. If you have a certain accommodation, you should allow it to go on doing this. And actually, RTHK should be able to play even a bigger role. I am aware that under Program 2, Public Affairs and General Television Program, the estimate for this year, as mentioned by other members, represents a reduction of 2% over the revised estimates for 2018-19. You may think that the reduction of 2% is because RTHK has not got any new target, that RTHK should best be staying where it is and not develop further. But to me, there are things that the public should pay attention to, and I'm not only talking about Hong Kong issues. These may be very important issues in their own right. For example, climate change, climate catastrophes. These are really very important issues, and the administration would like the public to pay more attention to that. But look at Hong Kong. You only have some typhoons in the summer like Mangkhut, and of course everybody reports on it. But then the extent it is covered does not arouse enough awareness amongst the public, meaning that there are such climate catastrophes around the world, and we have to do our part to slow down global warming. In this regard, RTHK can play a leading role. It can go to different places. Say you go to the North Pole, and recently, like Africa and South Asia, you have seen these climate disasters happening. And if you go to these places to gather news and produce thematic programs, and you can show these problems in a three-dimensional way to the public, so it actually can help the government get the attention of the public for issues of great importance. So RTHK is not just a station that reports on matters in Hong Kong and in the neighboring areas, but it can enhance itself into a broadcaster of regional news. It can be a platform for making such contributions. But of course, it will need a much bigger budget. But then policy-wise, I hope the administration can have this kind of horizon to work with. Next, at the Architectural Services Department. If the public have been paying attention, they will know that the ASD has brought in new thinking in terms of public architecture and involving different architectural styles. In fact, I particularly appreciate what the LCSD and the ASD have done in Tuen Mun Park, where there is the inclusive playground. And also, a lot of landscaping has been introduced into public architecture in Hong Kong. But apart from the compliments, I like to say that in recent years, some worrying phenomena have surfaced. Say, for example, the quality of public buildings. I've been watching the news recently. There are some projects under the ASD which had been discovered by the media to have quality problems, including at the end of 2018, the Audit Commission said that the velodrome at Tseung Kwan O that was completed for 4 years only, but there were 230 incidents of water seepage. Recently, even Sarah Lee, our goddess of cycling, had to mop the floor herself. And when a velodrome is flooded with water, it is not just inconvenience or causing inconvenience to the spectators, but then the cyclists who compete in the velodrome can die from it. So there have been over 200 incidents of water seepage at the velodrome. What happened? The ASD has only given very vague responses. They said that they could not get to the root of the problem because they did not know what happened initially. Secondly, the recreational building next to the Tin Shui Wai West Rail Station. In March this year, it was discovered by the media that the building was open only for a few years, but then there has been scaffolding erected all around it for major overhaul. And the reporters found that there was a hole in the ceiling of the library. There was so much water coming down, you had to put a bucket under it. And then there was whitish liquid flowing out from steps and the tiles were falling apart. So there was this overhaul, and again it is entrusted to China Construction. This was only commissioned in 2013, and now we are in 2019, and still you give the maintenance work to the original contractor. Some architectural experts told the press that normally speaking, this should happen only after 20 to 30 years of commissioning. Why is it that in the Tin Shui Wai Recreational Building, which was a project under ASD, it won so many design awards, but now I don't know whether the works was really shoddy. And then the latest example took place on the 29th of April 2019, and that is the East Kowloon Center in Outao Kok. The main contractor is Leighton. It is found that 5 caps and also the rebars were below standard. Well, of course, we only have a few main contractors to choose from, but I believe this is or reflects an important internal monitoring problem and whether corruption may be involved. The ASD is the boss. It should monitor the progress of these projects. Now, how can you stand up to these contractors so that we should not see such shoddy works after spending billions of dollars on them, and that there would have to be such overhaul necessities only after a few years? And then another program for the ASD is Program 1. This has to do with monitoring and advisory services with regard to conservation. I'd like to really ask the ASD, what recommendations have you made to the Development Bureau and also the Antiquities and Monuments Office? Because every year there have been graded architectural buildings which have been demolished, like Yaoling Hall in the mid-levels, and then Garden Center in Shamshui Po, which are to be demolished. Have you spoken out because these are graded buildings and you should be doing your best to conserve them? Or is it that you are just standing aside saying that, sorry, we are not that highly ranked to say anything? And then there are a lot of post-war modern buildings which face the possibility of demolition, like on Stubbs Road in Wan Chai, the AIA building, which is 50 years old. It can be graded as a historical building or even a monument, but the question is, it seems the AMO still harbors a mentality that they should only go for classical Western architecture with tiles, so on and so forth, which should be regarded as historical buildings. But then they are not looking at these buildings like the AIA building and the General Post Office in Central. ASD, you are in the sector, and the private practitioners are crying foul, saying that we are not conserving these post-war modern buildings. Did the ASD speak up? And then there is this example. And this is about the Grade 3 historical building in Tuen Mun. It's a fragile building. It is built with bricks, and it is in the shape of a semicircle. And it is a kiln producing pottery. And on the side, buildings are being demolished, and 2 public housing blocks will be built. So, ASD, are you saying anything in order to preserve Dragon Kiln? And the other building is only 20 meters away. And since people are doing such massive construction next to Dragon Kiln, are you saying that Dragon Kiln, which is graded 3, will not be affected? Now, of course, if you build new buildings, there should be better quality and there should be better urban design. But at the same time, with regard to old architectural buildings, the ASD has a duty towards them.
To allow development through and the department responsible for build heritage. Gary Fan. My remark is on the directional or conceptual aspect criticism on the appropriation bill and on head 184. And this year's budget, well, the estimated infrastructure expenditure will be over 100 billion per year, which is quite staggering. The government midterm forecasts that the CWRF will be from 2019 to 2020 as about 85 billion to be surge to 2022-2023 and 147 billion dollars. The 4-year cumulative growth can be as high as 73.5%, which way exceeded the economic growth inflation as any kind of livelihood spending. The government claimed there will be adequate resources to realize the long-term vision. But what is the reality? Instead, capitalizing the fund allocation as a black hole to spend as anything they want. However, when after spending lavishly through CWF on infrastructure, at the same time, a lot of livelihood projects, for example, housing, Medicare, the expenditures are simply pale in comparison, and all the poverty relief measures simply involve extra expenditure of 6 billion. And all this is relief alleviation measures only is about reduce the government income by 34 billion. And on healthcare, the budget suggested allocating 300 million to HA for recurrent spending, to reserve 5 billion for these facilities and training, and 110 billion public healthcare stabilization fund. Secretary have asked multiple occasions, we cannot have a holistic population policy blueprint when the government has no role to able to manage population planning, including each day introducing 150 one-way permit entries. But actually, we have the ability to do the planning that from this year, Chinese New Year, for the public health care screaming for help and bursting at the streams, that's the main cause. Even though we increase this funding, if we only start with the hardware and instead of suppressing demand at the source to respond overcome population issue, our public healthcare sector cannot reduce the pressure on the frontline workers, which is quite regrettable. And on housing, the budget had proposed any property restriction, purchase restriction ban. The New Democrats have raised that to the Finance Secretary multiple times, and there's no mention in budget to how do you suppress speculation investment by a company purchase. And for Australia that have a purchase quota, the speed of price drop had accelerated. It shows that the restriction has been effective. And in the budget have proposed reserving 2 billion for an NGO to build transitional housing. But I must stress that I would make that in record. The transitional housing fund is simply a band-aid solution to the housing crisis. The government should not put this transitional housing policy and measure into a regular policy. And next, I must stress that the budget proposed to draw up the housing reserve as part of the financial fiscal reserve and will continue to set aside capital for the building of public housing. But in fact, the next 4 years, they have to always draw up 82 billion housing reserve into the general accounts. Secretary for the Financial Treasury Services that the money drawn up can be used to bolster local GDP by 1.7 to 2%. And the first year, the 20 billion is just enough for the government's proposal to purchase 60 properties to set up over 130 community facilities, including RCHEs, daycare centers. I would like to level my criticism at this because this policy will become part of the demand for social facilities. When there is increase in demand, the transaction price will go up, and you're actually propping up the property prices. The government, through purchase 60 properties with 20 billion, and through buying shop spaces, is helping the speculators to prop up the market. Without this subjective thinking, but still led to this result. And for these facilities, whether they are aided, they will be operated along by the private sector, and it becomes that they will become the transfusion of interest from the government to the private sector. The Finance Secretary Paul Chen have cast 20 billion to buy 60 shop spaces, and the Secretary for Labor and Welfare provided cover for him, and he claimed that 20 billion purchase will be up 0.1% of the commercial space. It's not propping up because, according to the Secretary, it's a drop in the pocket. If this Secretary would like to make such a grand gesture, what kind of commercial building can buy with 20 billion? The local study had do some horizontal study, and the 20 billion can you buy the Tai Seng Financial Center twice, which is 3 minutes from the Wan Chai MTR. The MLT Mass Mutual building will be sold for 12.5 billion. It will turn to the daycare center. Then you actually got the hub reviews, and the Hopewell Center cost about 16 billion. And the residents, the RCHE residents, could actually went up to the rooftop restaurant for a nice buffet. Well, 20 billion is a lot of public money. And compared to the transaction price of Tai Seng Financial Center, Hopewell Center, and a Mass Mutual building, was the result of a massive shopping spree by mainland companies or a very high valuation. And recently, you have seen the Chinese capital receding, and for the February transactions, only have 25.9 billion. So which head you're referring to? Head 84, funding to other capital funds, 320 billion for the city for RF. Uh, 25.9 billion, and this February, that's the whole transaction value of the shops sector, and the Finance Secretary have the amount will be the 7 months transaction value. It's really at the expense of taxpayer to buy property at the top. We should not take the elderly and for right and claiming that the shops will be used for RCHE and community facilities. That the government don't need to spend anything, then would have 90 hectares of idle GIC sites. So there are sites and the land sale program would convert into private housing or luxury housing. And for 2002 to 2018, there are 109 public housing projects, and about 53 of those, half of those, had not set aside space for GIC facilities. And for the Kai-Tak Day Care Center, it should serve 60 elderly persons, and how much it costs? $12 million. 20 billion. How many daycare centers of Kai-Tak can you build? At 1,666 of them. But at the land grant debate, we talk about a shortage of commercial floor space, so with a hard sell the artificial island at Atlanta, and yet the government refused to build GIC facilities on their own land, and decided it would compete for space with the public. So that's the new fiscal philosophy of the finance secretary: buy high, sell low, and eager to buy property at the peak, but turn the GIC sites for idle or convert them into low-density housing. And Chairman, President, I must stress that the budget has set aside $6 billion to develop the Harbourfront Promenade and enhance the facilities. I think the relevant amount will be drawn from the CWRF. There will be a focus on fancy hardware, and bolster water sports. And finally, it was said that in the budget, there were actually extra allocation of $353 million for promotion. Well, this is going against the public opinion and public sentiment. For the past 6 months, the HCMB bridge and the XRL commissioning allowed the short stay and low-end visitors pour into Hong Kong, which put all our community at risk. And earlier, we were talking about the North District and Cheung Kwan O and Wan Shan Nigao spread to To Kwa Wan Chung Chung Chun Wan. These communities are gradually swamped by non-overnight staying mainland tourists. The tourism capacity have been stretched over the line. The government ignored this and decided to spend over $300 million on promotion. The 2012 Chief Executive Siwa Leung at least have conducted a study on the tourism capacity. Of course, they make a misjudgment that the surge continue rise in tourists. We need to build more hotels to meet the demand. They never consider that these individual visit scheme, low spending ones, could some go as far as Tung Chung to buy 2 bottles of soy sauce, and some would take photos on the residents' home. The change in tourism development affecting our living environment, and yet our government have endlessly decided to build more attractions, to do more promotion, but ignore our misery. Hong Kong people had to see with their eyes. If the place there would have a limit on receiving tourists, we are 73 million. We are 1/16 of Japan population. The 2018 passenger visitors numbers is 65 million. About half of them are not staying overnight. Compared to Japan 2018, 27 million. We are more than double than that. Hong Kong is such a tiny space. Why can't we get our facts straight? To develop tourism, hotel, retail, it all bear a social cost which we all have to bear. And yet our government took a blind eye. I want the government to consider to reform this one visit per week. They should make it once a month or even one every month, and to review our tourism capacity and to set an upper limit on our visitor tourism visit. For example, levy taxes on tourists to improve the situation of multiple communities being swamped by tourists. On all speaking, the budget which shows that the each government stress on infrastructure and livelihood and enjoy external demand. It shows our government fiscal monetary philosophy will see the hardware infrastructure as engine of our economic growth. On the other hand, education, Medicare, and elderly services are seated at expenditure. This is not expenditure. Please stop speaking.
Mr. Chen Chi-Chuen.
呢一節咧，我想就係
For this session, I want to speak on Head 37, Department of Health. We have the Secretary here. I haven't proposed any cuts for this head because I think we should give more to the Department of Health instead of cutting its expenditure or budget. I want certain things to be carried out more satisfactorily. For example, provide better electronic database and in enhancing dental service, and also spend more money on blood tests and antibody tests. I have a reservation about including the Department of Health in the schedule, because this has to do with the drinking and smoking control office. I expect that within this year, the heat-not-burn and e-cigarettes will be banned. I don't support this piece of legislation. I know there are certain repercussions in the backstage. You want people to support everything. The fugitive offender bill, the total ban of cigarettes, e-cigarettes, among other things. So this legislation to ban e-cigarettes may not get passed very easily. The Department of Health is backward in protecting personal data electronically. There's a recent report which may not have been noticed by many. It happened on the 25th of April. The Lipo Chun Dental Clinic staff discovered that there was a record, a document miss in respect of the appointment, information on the appointment of 343 patients in a dental, in one of the consultation rooms, including the name, the ID number of the patients were recorded. And it was reported in May. You may think that this is just the loss of a record book, but it illustrates the problem with the Department of Health in respect of record keeping. Why is it that the record book which was related to 2015, and then the stock taking was only happened in 2019, shouldn't one be disposed of when the new one starts to record the patient information? And shouldn't the information be stored in a computer and then the physical document be destroyed? According to some patients, the DOH clinics have a very backward system. Very often the information is recorded in a physical document, and some documents are only contain handwritten records, entries. Well, we should increase the provision under Head 37 so that there should be more equipment for electronic database to be kept. And in the future, the handling of appointment and medical documents should be done electronically so to minimize the loss of information. And well, that's we have to spend $2.1 billion on dental service for civil servants, an increase of 14.9%. Within this particular head, there will be also the provision of dental service to the general public. And for qualified persons pay the medical expenses and hospital charges. Although the provisions have increased, but the number of beneficiaries has not seen any significant increase. For the non-public clinic, we have 290,000 attendants, an increase of 5,000 over last year. For dental clinics, the number of attendants is 775,000. Last year it was 700 and 600,000, an increase of 8,000. The small increase reflects the aging population and the increasing demand for dental service. At present, the dental clinic under the D of H is mainly about providing service to eligible persons, i.e. civil servants and their family members, and they are not doing a lot for the general public. They usually open during the weekdays from 8 o'clock to 5 something in the afternoon. Low income the people cannot use the service easily unless you queue up very early at 5 a.m. for the quotas. And then there will be a lot of tests before elderly people can have access. The provision for dental service should be increased significantly, and then the service should be made available to more people in the community. But that will lead to the question of where do we get the number of dentists we need. I leave this issue to the Secretary. I just want more elderly people to get the dental service and to improve their oral hygiene. I propose that more expenditure be allowed by the D of H team in carrying out blood tests. Well, we have seen a developing epidemic of measles. We raised urgent questions, but those questions did not result in anything good. There were no more blood tests. People working at the airport who needed blood tests complained a lot. There's a daily quota of 150 to assure the airport staff. The government arranged for the test to find out whether they have the antibody. I spend $500 and do the same in a clinic. I have the antibodies needed. I won't get another vaccination. But there is only a quota of 200, and we have more than 10,000 people working at the airport. It's just a very small portion. So we should make available more resources. I'm not asking you to test antibodies of everyone in Hong Kong. That will not be realistic. Just handling the workload at the airport has proved to be very messy already. But we need to get prepared with the provision of more resources. Now I will turn to Correctional Services Department. In the past, we did move amendments. Mr. Leung Yu Chung was very concerned about inmates. And then Mr. Leung Kok-hong, the proposed cuts to the meal allowance, meal expenditure. And then the pro-establishment member said, you are cold-blooded, those inmates won't get food. We propose expenditure cut on a certain head because we don't have any power to increase the provision. We just want the item brought up for discussion as a separate issue. We don't need to cut everything. We just make a small cut. Now no one has proposed any cut to the CSD's heads. I can still speak on CSD. I just want to mention one point here. That is, the provision for meals and food has not increased in tandem with inflation. Under 118, the actual expenditure in 2018 and 2019 and 20 is $78.89 million. It's the same for 3 years. If you buy meals yourself, you know that the prices are rising all the time. If you have to maintain the quality of food, you must increase the expenditure. If we look at CPI, in 2017, early 2017, for food-related sub-index, 106.1. In early 2019, the same index has increased to 113.1. Over the 2 years, food prices have been increasing. So you can imagine what would happen to the inmates. If we have fewer inmates, of course, the expenditure would drop. With fewer inmates, they need to consume fewer meals. But I've checked that the number of inmates has not suffered any big drop. But if the budget is not increasing, so what would happen? So they would have to be on a diet, they eat less as a whole, or the food quality would be even poorer. That's very undesirable. If the expenditure is suppressed, food lowering the quality of food, and as a result, the lowering the expenditure of the CST. That's very, very undesirable. I have friends who have been imprisoned, including some Council members. Food in the institutions is a disgrace. It's sometimes smelly. It's really bad, and they have to take it. So the food quality is already very poor, but without any increase, you are going to make it even worse and even less tasty. The food is barely to provide a subsistence. Of course, we need to increase the provision. We need to improve the quality and don't provide any food with marginal quality, which food that is about to go bad should not be provided. But of course, if you complain, the CST officers would think that you are trying to stir up trouble. And after the Fugitive Offenders Bill is passed, I suspect that more people will be arrested after the CE has issued the order. And that is to say, those people in custody would be more. There would be more. I don't know whether the CST got wind of anything in February for the subhead 118 food expenditure for the institutions. That there's a proposed increase because they need to increase manpower and expenditure in other aspects as well. Another subhead that would see an increase in expenditure would be 193, the wages for the inmates. 2017, the expenditure is 42.82 million. In 2018, it's 39.22 million. There's a drop. Let's guess whether we are going to see any increase this year. The answer is no change, $39.22 million. Although these wages are nothing but nominal, but the administration should at least factor in inflation. There should be at least some symbolic upward adjustment. Inmates do their work. They are contributing to society. They should be recognized for doing this. Imagine someone who has been sentenced to 10 or 20 years of imprisonment. They will be doing the road signs every day, and every year they get the same wages. Do you think this is reasonable? Do you think that they feel respected? I will urge the government to adjust wage levels in accordance with general inflation, and there should be back pay for the past years. I don't know whether the other members will speak and advocate this for their behalf, on their behalf. And it's been discovered that the expat inmates have more food than local inmates. Those who use Chinese food will have a congee for lunch and a piece of bread. But if you have a Western dish, you have an egg, a hamburger, and a tea with a cup of milk tea. If you have a dark skin or white skin, you will be given Western food. If you are someone with yellow skin, you are regarded as an Asian, and you will be given Chinese food. Some inmates asked for change, and then it was refused, and some inmates have asked for vegetarian food, and the reason the CSD officer asked for the reason. He said it's just a lifestyle issue. But the answer was you can't do that, otherwise, unless you say you are Buddhist.
不妨係
So I have taken up with the commissioner for CNS, and if future inmates have a similar problem, do let me know, and I'll reflect to the new commissioner. Mr. Wu Chi-wai. I like to supplement what I said in my last round on the Department of Health. I have 2 more points to make. When it comes to increasing the number of dental clinics, I have discussed with the Department of Health and your colleagues, Secretary, for a long time. Why is the services of the dental clinics so limited? According to them, it's because we lack of dentists, and it boils down to the number of places in our dentistry schools, whether the number of places can be increased. I know we're not just short of dentists. We are short of different medical professionals. We don't have enough doctors and other allied professionals, health professionals. So would there be training places for doctors or dentists? Can we increase the number effectively? If so, by what means? And whether the whole government agrees to this direction, or do we have to go through UGC? In the funding process, the UGC will have to take away places from some of the faculties and transfer them to dentistry and medicine, so that we can have more places for dentists and doctors at the expense of other faculties. So this is a very fundamental issue. If the government wants to face up to the shortage of medical staff in Hong Kong, the government must very seriously consider how we can effectively increase the number of places in our dental and medical schools. If we don't do that, even though you relax the requirements for overseas trained doctors and dentists to come back to serve in Hong Kong, you are still constrained. If we look at the state of aging population in Hong Kong, if we are to reach OECD's standard, the Organization for Economic Development, we are 9,000 doctors short by 2030. That means the shortfall is serious. And that has not taken into account natural wastage in the interim. So shouldn't the government very carefully consider ways and means to fill the gap here? We should not focus our energy on discussing whether overseas doctors should be allowed to practice back in Hong Kong. Even if we allow that to take place, the number or the supply would only be limited. So the Secretary must really discuss with the administration very carefully how we can increase the number of training places for dentists and doctors. And the second point I'd like to raise is about family clinics for the civil service. Last year, there was an application for establishing more family clinics. I stressed at the meeting that the current mechanism is such that there are quotas reserved in the OPDs of HA for civil servants. In other words, there are quotas reserved in our general outpatient clinics for civil servants. Therefore, when more families clinics are established, well, since the hardware is already there, then the established hardware should be used appropriately for provision of outpatient services. And of course, if that is possible, we still lack medical staff. I agree that fundamentally the problem is a shortage of medical staff. But perhaps we should think along this line. Since the families clinics are already there, the hardware is there, then as a matter of policy, we should make it flexible so that families clinics can form part of the public healthcare sector. They shouldn't be set up just to serve civil servants. That is better utilization of very limited public resources. Secretary, when you applied for approval to set up families clinics, I elaborated on this point already. I'm not happy with your response, which is it is the government's duty as an employer to provide healthcare services for the civil service. I have no problem with this. My question is, how come we cannot make use of our families clinics as part of the hardware to serve the general public? My next question relates to the disciplined services. I think there are two issues involved. I'm more concerned about the having a separate salary scale for the fire services department. We've seen major fires which no one wanted to see, and the number of casualties among our fire saving officers were serious. There were a few deaths, and you can imagine the risks and danger faced by our firemen. And then they are on shift for 24 hours, and then they rest for 2 days. That is their shift pattern. Very often, they have to work for more than 48 hours in a week. Because of the nature of the work and because of the long working hours, firemen should warrant an independent pay scale. The government must consider this because the members of this disciplined service are in constant danger when on duty. And if we do not address this appropriately, we're not being fair to our life-saving officers. Secondly, I'd like to talk about quotas for members of the disciplined services. When the officers are required to move out, now we have received many requests for help. When a member of the discipline services leaves his job, he has to apply for public housing, and he cannot move out before he is allocated PRH flat. Of course, you may tell me that to solve the problem, we need more public housing units, but this solution will take time to come by. And then there are many members of the disciplined services waiting for allocation of PRH flats, and the waiting time gets longer and longer. and this would do a blow to the morale of our officers. So I have a simple suggestion. When a member of the disciplined services has to leave his quarters, he has to wait until he is allocated a flat. I hope that the Security Bureau can seriously consider discussing with the the housing authority or the housing department to see whether they should be allowed to purchase HOS flats using green forms so that they can have an additional choice, so that they can they can have certainty in housing, and this will provide an alternative for members of the disciplined services that are moving out of their quarters. So this is an alternative, an additional choice for them. I hope the administration can take this into consideration. Because if you don't allow them to acquire an HOS flat, they will be waiting for a PRH flat, and meanwhile they will then occupy quarters resources. And if you take on board my suggestion, we will offer an additional choice for them. Now I'd like to talk about the performance of our Trade and Industry Department. On various occasions, we've said that the Trade and Industry Department is there to help the SMEs. In what way? At special FC meetings, the administration told us that the T&I industry would not tackle the issue of reindustrialization. That is not the work of the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau. And so I don't know which department or bureau is responsible for reindustrialization. So this so-called, Mr. Wu Chiwai, I'm afraid the T&I department is for the next session. Oh. Well, it's under head 155. 155 is under the Innovation and Technology Commission. Yes, I just want to have this concept sorted out. Whether it be the Innovation and Technology Commission, the T&I industry, or the Commerce and Economic Development Bureau, I'd like to know which party will help us to implement reindustrialization. There's been a lot of talk about this, but no action, in particular because of the U.S.-China trade conflict. Many manufacturers have moved their manufacturing plants to Southeast Asian countries. So is there any strategy from the part of our government for enterprises that have their manufacturing base moved out to relocate their high value added process back to Hong Kong? Well, I've pointed out time and again that the Made in Hong Kong brand is a valuable label. If 30% of the work processes are qualified, then the Made in Hong Kong brand can be used. Has the government been proactive in promoting this? Or will the government just be dispersing funds, offering support this and there, and consider their job done? This so-called support may not be really helping Hong Kong at all. So we have to support R&D upstream, but more important still, we have to commercialize the products of R&D, and this will help us to build up our production chain in Hong Kong. If we are not party to this very important element of the production chain, then we are only serving others in our R&D activities. We are not benefiting ourselves. And we may be supporting INT, we may be supporting SMEs, but I'm afraid that these efforts have not helped to promote diversification of our economy. It is not bringing any real benefits to our economy. So what we're doing is just upstream R&D, but when it comes to commercialization and reindustrialization, we are doing precious little.
Mr. Charles Mark. Well, we separate the debate on the heads with or without amendment. I understand that you have a hard time being a gatekeeper because you to make sure that whether we have digressed from the unamended heads into the amended ones. However, what Mr. Wu said highlighted a problem that a lot of the policies which the normal folk was mistaken that responsible by one department but the other for reindustrialization. It actually unrelated to the Trade and Industry Department. It actually fall under the ITC, under ITB. And Head 155 is then, or in this part of the debate, says admissible. So I hope that the Deputy President and President can be more generous because sometimes we inevitably overstep. Please just don't jump up as soon as you hear the TID because it actually fall under ITC. I'd like to speak on 155 Innovation Technology Commission. Earlier I covered on R&D and the Tech Voucher Program. In the past 2 years, since last year, this year actually, they do a tax deduction for SME. The eligible company for the first 2 million of R&D expenses can be given a triple tax deduction, but the remainder amount will be eligible for 200% tax deduction. Well, that's welcomed by all and passed by LegCo. I must point out that, well, in these 2 months, and thanks to ITC and the IRS, NRD, they conduct a forum or a briefing session with the sector. A lot of company has been chasing me or chasing the government through me and ask press for more context. Didn't LegCo pass the measure? Though that means it's in effect, so I would like to do this tax deduction. A lot of the guidelines and rules and regulations have been stuck in the IRD for quite some time. And now they missed it because a lot of companies told me that maybe when we file tax return before April, I can declare this tax deduction, but now I couldn't do it. But now that after this briefing session, I found it's very complicated. Well, never mind. But however, I noticed a few issues which I government should take note. A lot of companies sees that for us to do a local R&D and wish to benefit, the government intent is to allow more companies, even though there are SMEs or even startups, to benefit. However, it was found that to apply as an R&D organization is complicated. Well, the government had the grounds for that, but not everyone can claim themselves to be an R&D organization. How they confirm? So they do it the simplest way. That the accredited R&D organization at the first phase, the universities, the government research centers are included first, and the other private enterprises, even of their larger scale, they feel that they have done a lot of R&D internally. actually quite some time to apply, and there's actually some ambiguity, and not sure how long the IRD will take. That actually quite make the companies difficult, because a lot of companies see themselves as conducting the R&D that are within the scope allowed by the ITC and the IRD. However, it took very long. However, if we must speed things quick, I could turn it into a eligible project. I'll just collaborate with the government research center. Well, they could have done it by themselves. However, in order to speed things up for tax deduction, had to work with a university or a public research center. While it's not necessary, is that really the best approach for them? It could be inconvenience or give rise to IP issues. The government must face up to it. How do you allow the small, medium, or large-scale enterprises companies? Well, some big companies will see that the current process is complicated. If you're not able to resolve that after quite some time, well, you launch this tax deduction, but nobody managed to obtain it, and the industry will be disgruntled. So, and hope the next 2 years the government come back to let's go. That a lot of companies to manage to have the tax deducted. Otherwise, it will all be drawings. We have suggested to the government that since a lot of the SMEs may not directly benefit from the tax deduction, the government should consider using other ways. For example, as said earlier, the internship program, providing direct benefit in place of tax deduction, so that they can able to get support through other channels. However, we still go back to the question this one last time talking about it, that a lot of the organizations that be requested that are tenants of the science park and cyberport. This is quite inconvenient for them. So in order to qualify, they register themselves in the science park and the cyberport, and that the newspaper would actually check whether the offices have any company present, and while the startup space have anyone in there. There are not many people in there, because a lot of companies, in order to prove the relationship with the cyberport and the science park, so there's likely they actually stage a presence there, but actually most of the work is done outside there. This may not be the best use of these campuses. So if which they want to join the club and resort to this method, it's not necessary. A lot of these benefits should be open to all the companies. I'm going to move to another head. 173. Working Families and Student Financial Assistance Agency, WFSFAA. So some other members mentioned that the caring and sharing scheme of $4,000. Well, this from the tech sector see it as a huge laughing stock. Well, with the worry that whether there need a lot of things to fill it in the form, it's actually very simple. The Chief Secretary for Administration have told people that it would take 18 months. Well, a chairman aware what the secretary said, yes, will take 16 months. Well, the government internal procedures and tendering will take 15 to 6 months and ask you to deliver within 2 months. Well, even the Deputy President, Madam Deputy, is laughing. Well, then, resulting chaos is plain to see. Even though they didn't use computer, but However, they led to the phenomenon called last in, first out. Well, the programmers will know. The last to file in the form would get the money first. So even though it doesn't involve computer, as something computer related had to come out, which made it wins. Why and which of the government officials have made such decision? I'm not in a position to speculate whether it is the chief secretary or which bureau chiefs are involved. Well, I actually have visited a lot of government departments, even though it doesn't fall any particular heads, but let me mention their names. For example, the OGCIO and the MSD. I found that they have been doing a lot of work to push the department to apply technology. A lot of the smaller technology projects through the Tech Connect block have subsidized a lot of the projects. There are actually dozens of those, and there are more of them scattered to different departments. Some of them are quite good. Let me recall one thing. I just want to bring this out. I hope that the financial secretary to consider whether to deal with the following problem. I found that the middle and lower tiered staff and at the department and office level, whether they could do something innovative. For example, getting millions of funding from an ITC. They would try to experiment with that. But is it the project large enough to be decided by the higher up? But actually, they're quite averse to technology. For example, this $4,000 on handout. If this is happening, I think government should analyze the cause. Well, for the labor-intensive procedures, we hope to automate it. That's one example. I couldn't think of any reason that why the WFS-FAA shouldn't consider that, and yet it's the route they've taken. Enough on this. Well, I'm not only want to criticize this particular agency or which decision is made at the bureau level. It's better that we know, however, but it shows at the over government level for smallest project you can experiment. For example, software and hardware that they could come up with something new. However, when they get to a higher level, they just refuse. For key projects, they refuse to deploy technology. What does that demonstrate? I believe these are important but interesting management issues. So as to how do we improve the government operations? And finally, on 16T, RTHK. As we know, the Democratic camp have been asking at RTHK to improve the resources, and yet the government have gone the other way. As we know that due to mostly political reasons. Let's not deny it. A lot of the members, like Dennis Kwok has said, that how old the facilities, equipment are. Sometimes I feel that the government now had just we have assigned the former HEV spectrum and push them to do so, to put a programming. And for the loyalist camp, when they asked, when they refused to funding for the new building, and keep on squeezing them dry, and a lot of members asked him then not to produce news. A lot of them asked him to broadcast sport events in the name to promote sports development, but I know what's going on. It's not like it's European League, and then you complain about the low ratings. You just want to burn away their time and voices, and don't want them to broadcast anything that was stellar ratings of we say acclaimed programming. For example, current affairs and commentary. The RTHK news program could not be criticized as biased. For example, the news criticism program was actually hosted by Jasper Chung. That used to be in the chair, which is esteemed figure in the loyalty camp, which is our predecessor, and I still call him the president. So what's so biased? And yet the loyalty camp at LegCo would decide to see it through the political lens. And with RTHK such a stellar reputation supported by the public, they wanted to make sure it wither and squeeze, bleeding them dry. Every time they ask him to broadcast my sport program, I can only wince because we all know that whether they are truly supportive of sports, they just want to bleed RTHK to dry. I so submit.
我提醒委員，
I'd like to remind members that in accordance with our arrangement, this debate would end at about 7:30 p.m. At about 7 p.m., I'll invite officials to speak, and then we will vote on the inclusion of the relevant heads into the schedule. Members who would like to speak, please press the button as early as you can. Mr. Evan Young. Thank you, Madam Deputy. I'm going to speak on a number of heads. First, head 173, Working Family and Student Financial Assistance Office. In 2017, there were 60,000 cases, and then it dropped to 59,000 in 2018. Is it that there are fewer low-income families that need assistance? Of course not. According to my office, it's because the application procedure was too complicated. So people just make out an existence instead of going through the complicated application process. Actually, the longer the working hour, the poverty they suffer became serious, and they have a very small social network. They didn't know where to turn to apply for social benefits. If we have to reach out to these people and help them fill out the application forms through social workers, then we need to increase the budget for WFSFAA. The SAR government is most concerned that we might become a welfare state. But we look at these low-income families, such as a family with 2+1, 2 parents and 1 child, and the parents work for 192 hours, the child is in school, that the food allowance for them would just be $2,200. For 2017 and 2018, there were 59,000. Let's suppose they all get the full allowance. The total expenditure is just $130 million, given the huge financial capabilities of the SAR government. This is just a small drop in the ocean. These families have to fill up all kinds of forms, then get a small allowance. It would may just be sufficient for paying the tuition fees of the child. Actually, the SAR government is duty bound to help them complete the application. If the SAR government thinks that it must be kept very complicated and the vetting should be very stringent, then you should increase manpower so that the system can really help the needy. Apart from working families, we also have undergraduates and graduates who need assistance. Well, if they can help you, they don't need assistance. Of course, most undergraduates have to apply for means-tested assistance. They know that it will be very complicated. They need to visit the office in Cheung Sha Wan a number of times. So after they have graduated and they get a job, they will be burdened with heavy debt. Of course, they need to repay their loans. For those who are just working and are not getting high pay, in the 10 years after graduation, they would get a bill from the office for repayment every 3 months. And different loan schemes would do that at the same time. So how can these young people, young graduates, cope? It's been And they have asked whether the office can combine the repayment of different loans so that they can reduce their burden. But the answer is no. The government is so inflexible. We have so much in our public coffers. Do we have to be so mean to our young people? We have suggested in our petition to the government that there should be an assistance in the form of 10 years of interest payment for these graduates. Well, this year the FS has failed to take up this proposal. Let's hope next year it will be accepted. And let me now turn to RTHK. Many colleagues have tried to ask for more for RTHK, and that they have pointed out that they are not getting what they need. But I'm not someone from the media sector, but I know that they've been doing a good job. In the past 2 years, when we scrutinized the budget, I asked questions about the turnover rate of RTHK. Last year, compared with the year before last, the turnover rate has seen no particular change. Unless unspecified grades, we are talking about more program officers and assistant progressors who have left in large numbers. There were 8, and this year is 7 program officers. And it's said that RTHK 31's broadcasting hour will increase from 20 to around the clock. In the last 2 years, we have seen a number of people leaving, but there are only a few new posts created. For 2019-2020, the RTHK would create only one new post of program officer. There are 5 vacancies for APO, and there's no PA programming assistant post. Can the establishment handle the broadcasting around the clock? I know that the RTHK people are very versatile, but you cannot ask the SAR government should not ask them to be burdened with so heavy a workload. And then the highest rank of a program officer is the deputy director of broadcasting. But when the last incumbent left, the 2 assistant directors took turn to act in that deputy director post. Why hasn't the government allowed this to continue? Why hasn't the deputy director post been filled? This is puzzling. I don't want to speculate the reason behind. I would like to say that it seems that the senior posts are more and more taken up by administrative officers. The RTHK was accused to be an independent kingdom, but it's very different from the day of C.H. Tung's administration. I hope the RTHK would enjoy editorial independence. The broadcasting house project has yet to be completed. I hope this can be done very soon so that they can continue public broadcasting service to the public. And for the Innovation and Technology Department, and there's a talent admission scheme and the postdoctorate hub scheme. As pointed out by Mr. Zhao Mo, we are moving in the right direction in our attempt to attract talents. The question here is the attractiveness. Of course, we want to have talents in innovation coming from other countries. But what about Hong Kong people who are also talents? Who are now in foreign countries? Can we attract them to come back? Well, but the government is very generous when it comes to comments. But what is it really committed to providing more resources to attract them? Of course, all talents would have to consider whether the place they work with has the rule of law or has a good general government system. Shenzhen is doing a lot in offering financial incentives. We cannot compete on that ground, but we we can only compete on the basis of good government and the rule of law. And now when foreign governments query our development in respect of our legal system, these people will know about such comments. And also when chambers of commerce cast doubt on our legal system and the new development, they will be deterred. I've been told by some startups that yes, the postdoctorate hub would help them recruit people, but if they're not a tenant of the science park, then they will not get any priority. Why is it that we only give priority to tenants of a science park? Is it that innovation can only take place in the science park by the tenants? Of course, the answer is no. You have to look into why so many startups want to hire or lease premises outside the science park, because it's obvious science park is not the only available opportunity. We should not just give priority to a dedicated organization, i.e. the science park, and everyone is supposed to chip in. I hope the Secretary will listen to us. Please be more open-minded. Please allow other companies who are contributing to our innovation and technology to be given the same treatment. Now let me turn to Head 169, the Intersection of Communications Secretariat Office. There was an amendment last time, but there was no clear definition of interception last time, and it will not cover the situation where the police ask for the records and data from the telecommunication company. Is that going to be counted as interception? Now the personal data are exposed to or are at risk of executive manipulation, so people are more concerned. In 2016, law enforcement agencies were told that they need to apply to the court before they can intercept communication. There were more than 1,000 cases of application, but there were 4,000 cases of requests made to telecommunication ordinance by the law enforcement agency. So what has happened? Is it that such interception operations have happened without legal oversight? If we allow this loophole to continue, and then the LEAs can intercept internet information without oversight, without monitoring, this will be most worrying. All over the world, people have been talking about protection of privacy and also to regulate the interception of communication. And now we know that there were more than 3,000 cases of interception which went beyond the regulatory system. We should not allow this to continue. Although the official here are not directly related to the laws in this regard, the SAR government should reconsider whether there's a need to expand the definition of interception of communication, and also it should be expanded to cover other forms of communication instead of just telecommunication. And there should be proper regulation of such operations. I hope the government will listen to us, and so that we can properly protect privacy. Mr. Houghton Chow.